A customer asked if the aisle that hides had moved again. I thought I misheard him. The register hummed in that low, electrical way it always did past midnight, a sound that seemed louder because everything else had thinned out. Cars on the road, voices, the steady churn of the world. The fluorescent lights above flickered in slow, tired intervals, each pulse making the store feel like a place caught between frames. "I'm sorry," I said. The man stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, not looking at me but somewhere over my shoulder, deeper into the store. He had the kind of face you forget as soon as you stop looking at it. Not old, not young, not tired, but worn. "The aisle that hides," he repeated. Did it move again? There are things people say at night you learn not to engage with. Drunk questions, paranoid complaints, quiet confessions disguised as jokes. The late shift teaches you to let words pass like traffic, noticed, but not followed. "I don't think we have anything like that," I said. He nodded, as if that answer confirmed something he already knew. "It won't stay in one place," he said. "It doesn't like being watched." I smiled in the polite, empty way that gets people to leave. "Is there something I can help you find?" His eyes flicked to me for the first time. There was no humor in them. No confusion either. "If it's still here," he said, "it's already helping itself." He turned and walked out. The door chimed, a thin, artificial sound that seemed too clean for the hour, and then he was gone. The parking lot beyond the glass was a smear of sodium light and shadow, empty except for a single car I didn't recognize. I watched him get in, start the engine, and drive away without turning his headlights on. For a while, I just stood there. Then I shook it off. People say strange things at night. The store was small enough that I could see most of it from the counter, but large enough that the edges felt uncertain. 6 aisles, evenly spaced. Snacks in aisle 1, canned goods in 2, household items in 3, refrigerated goods along the back wall, frozen foods humming quietly to the right. A neat, predictable grid. I had worked there for 3 months. Long enough to memorize the layout. Long enough to know the rhythm of it, the way the lights buzzed, the way the refrigeration units cycled, the way the floor tiles creaked in certain places. Long enough that the store felt stable. That's why I noticed it the next time I stepped away from the register. I went to aisle 3 to restock paper towels. They weren't where they were supposed to be. At first, it felt like a simple mistake. I checked the shelf twice, then again, tracing the labels with my finger. Cleaning supplies, plastic wraps, light bulbs, no paper towels. I walked to the back room, grabbed another box, and came back. The shelf was full, neatly stocked, perfectly aligned. The brand labels facing forward in identical rows. I stood there with the box in my hands, feeling something small and sharp settle under my ribs. I hadn't left long enough for someone else to do it. There had been no one else in the store. I told myself I must have looked at the wrong shelf the first time. That was easier. After that, I started noticing other things. Small at first. Aisle 2 felt longer than it should have. Just by a step or two. Enough that I reached for something and had to take an extra stride to get there. The spacing between shelves seemed uneven in places. Not visibly, but in the way my body moved through them. My shoulders brushed metal edges where they hadn't before. The turn at the end of aisle 5 came a fraction later than I expected. Once, I turned down aisle 1 and felt a brief, disorienting sense that I had walked into the wrong place entirely, that I had entered a version of the aisle that didn't match the one I knew. But when I looked closely, everything was where it should be. Chips, candy, bottled drinks, order. Still, I started counting steps. From the register to the back wall, 34. From the front door to the end of aisle 4, 21. I wrote the numbers on a scrap of receipt paper and kept it in my pocket. The next night, the numbers were different. It was around 2:15 a.m. when I heard something fall. A soft, contained sound. Not a crash, more like something being placed down too hard. I was at the register, scrolling through my phone to stay awake. I looked up. The store stretched out in front of me, silent. Empty. The sound had come from somewhere near the middle aisles. I stepped out from behind the counter. Hello, I called. No answer. I walked slowly toward aisle 3. Halfway there, I realized something was wrong. There were too many aisles. I stopped. From the register, I could see all 6 clearly. But standing here, the sightlines didn't line up. There was a gap where there shouldn't be one. A sliver of space between aisle 2 and 3 that seemed too narrow to be an aisle, but too wide to be nothing. I took a step closer. The space shifted. Not visibly, not like something moving, but like my perspective had slipped. The gap was gone, replaced by the familiar line of shelves. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Just tired, I muttered. I kept walking. At the end of aisle 3, a bottle of detergent lay on its side. I picked it up and set it back in place. As I turned to leave, I felt it. That subtle, crawling awareness. The sense that something in the store had adjusted itself in response to me. The second customer came 2 nights later. A woman this time, older. Her hair pulled back too tightly, as if she were trying to hold something in place. She approached the counter with a basket containing a few items: milk, bread, a pack of batteries. She didn't look at me as I scanned them. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "Is the aisle still here?" I paused. "What aisle?" She hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. "The one that hides things." My hand stilled on the counter. "I think you might have the wrong store," I said. "No," she said. "It's this one. It's always this one." The scanner beeped. I bagged her items, trying to keep my movements steady. "I've never seen anything like that," I said. "You wouldn't," she replied. "Not until it notices you." A cold, hollow feeling opened in my chest. "What does it hide?" I asked, before I could stop myself. She finally looked at me. "Whatever it wants," she said. "At first, it's small. Things you won't miss right away." She took the bag from my hand. "Then it learns." The door chimed as she left. I stood there for a long time after she was gone. That night, I lost my pen. It was a cheap plastic thing I kept in my shirt pocket. I used it constantly, for receipts, notes, idle scribbles when the store was empty. I reached for it and it wasn't there. I checked the counter, the register, my pockets. Nothing. Annoying, but not unusual. I went to the supply drawer to grab another. When I came back, I saw it. My pen, sitting upright on the shelf in aisle 4. Perfectly centered between 2 rows of canned soup. I walked over slowly, picked it up. It was mine. Same scratch along the side. Same slight bend near the clip. I hadn't been in aisle 4 in hours. I turned, scanning the store. Everything was still, but the stillness felt different now. Intentional. After that, I started watching. Not just casually, but carefully. Deliberately. I would stand at the end of an aisle and stare down its length, trying to hold it in place with my attention. If the customer had been right, if it didn't like being watched, then maybe I could stop it. For a while, it seemed to work. The layout stayed consistent. The shelves didn't shift. The distances held. But it came at a cost. Every time I looked away, even for a second, I felt a change. Subtle. Precise. A product out of place. A shelf slightly misaligned. A space that felt just a little too deep. It was as if the store was rearranging itself in the moments I wasn't looking. And it was doing it on purpose. The first time I couldn't find the exit, I thought I was panicking. I had stepped away from the register to check something near the back. When I turned to return, the front door wasn't where it should be. The sightline was wrong. I walked forward, expecting it to appear. It didn't. Instead, I found myself at the end of aisle 5. I turned around. The store stretched out behind me, unchanged. But the door, bright, obvious, impossible to miss, was gone. My heart started to pound. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." I walked faster, moving down the center of the store. The aisles seemed longer now. Taller. The fluorescent lights flickered, and for a moment, the entire space felt like it had tilted. I stopped, closed my eyes, took a breath. When I opened them, the door was back. Exactly where it should be. I stood there, shaking. It had hidden the exit. Just for a moment. Just long enough. After that, I understood. It wasn't random. It was testing. Learning. I started losing other things. My phone disappeared for nearly an hour before reappearing in the freezer, wedged between two boxes of ice cream. A stack of receipts vanished from the counter and showed up neatly arranged on a shelf I hadn't stocked in weeks. Each time, the item would return. But always somewhere I hadn't been. Somewhere I hadn't seen. It was mapping me. Figuring out what I noticed. What I didn't. What I cared about. Then it took something that didn't come back. I couldn't remember my coworker's name. I knew I had one. A day shift employee who left notes for me, who I occasionally overlapped with at the start or end of a shift. But when I looked at the schedule on the wall, the name next to the morning slot meant nothing. I stared at it, trying to force recognition. There was none. The handwriting in the logbook, friendly, casual notes about inventory and deliveries, felt like it belonged to a stranger. I flipped through pages, searching for something familiar. Nothing. It was as if that person had been erased. Not from the store. From me. I leaned against the counter, a cold sweat breaking across my skin. It learns what you fear losing. The woman's voice echoed in my head. I closed the logbook. Didn't look at it again. After that, the aisle started moving more aggressively. I would turn a corner and find myself in a part of the store that didn't line up with anything else. Aisles intersecting at impossible angles. Shelves extending too far, or stopping too short. Once, I walked down aisle 2 and emerged in front of the freezers without ever passing aisle 3. Another time, I turned into aisle 6 and found it empty, no shelves, no products, just a long, narrow corridor stretching into darkness. I backed out immediately. When I looked again, it was normal. But I knew. That was it. That was the aisle that hides. I tried to avoid it. Tried to stay near the register, where the layout was most stable. But it didn't matter. It started coming to me. I would look up and see a gap between aisles that hadn't been there a moment before. A space that felt wrong, that pulled at my attention like a loose thread. If I stared at it, it would close. If I looked away, even for a second, it would be somewhere else. Closer. The night it took my name, I realized I couldn't leave. It started small. I went to sign a receipt and hesitated. The name didn't come. I stood there, pen hovering over paper, waiting for it to surface. It didn't. Panic rose in my throat. I checked my ID. The card was blank. No photo. No name. Just an empty surface where something should have been. I dropped it. No. I whispered. No. 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 The store hummed around me, steady and indifferent. Or maybe not indifferent. Maybe listening. I looked up. At the far end of the store, between aisle 3 and 4, there was a gap. Narrow. Dark. Waiting. I knew what I had to do. Whatever it had taken, it was in there. Hidden. I stepped out from behind the counter. The air felt different as I moved toward the gap, thicker, as if the space itself resisted me. The fluorescent lights above flickered, their rhythm slowing. Each step felt longer than it should have. The gap didn't get closer. Then, suddenly, I was standing in front of it. It wasn't an aisle in the normal sense. There were no shelves at the entrance. No products. Just a narrow passage, barely wide enough for me to step through. The darkness inside wasn't total, but it was wrong, like a dimness that absorbed light instead of lacking it. I hesitated. Behind me, the store stretched out, familiar and ordered. Safe. Or as safe as it had ever been. In front of me, something waited. I took a breath, and stepped inside. The space changed immediately. The floor under my feet felt softer, as if the tiles had given way to something with a slight give. The air was colder. I turned to look back. The entrance was gone. In its place was a wall of shelves, stacked with products I didn't recognize. I swallowed. Okay. I said, my voice sounding small. Okay. I moved forward. The aisle stretched on. Longer than it should have been. Longer than the store could contain. Shelves rose on either side, packed with items that shifted when I tried to focus on them, labels blurring, shapes indistinct. Every few steps, something would catch my eye. A phone. A pen. A stack of receipts. Objects I recognized. But when I reached for them, they were gone. The aisle seemed to rearrange itself around me, always keeping what I wanted just out of reach. Give it back, I said. My voice didn't echo. It was absorbed. I kept walking. Time lost meaning. The lights above didn't flicker. They pulsed, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. The aisle narrowed, then widened, then narrowed again. At one point, I passed a shelf filled with ID cards. Hundreds of them, all blank. I stopped. My hands trembled as I reached out. One of the cards shifted, turning slightly, as if acknowledging me. I grabbed it. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a flash, a memory. Standing at the counter, signing my name. The shape of it, the motion, gone before I could hold onto it. The card went blank again. No, I said. I moved faster. The aisle seemed to respond, stretching ahead of me, retreating as I advanced. It didn't want me to reach the end. Or maybe there was no end. Then I saw it. At the far edge of the dim light, something different. Not a shelf. Not a product. A shape. Human. Standing still. I approached slowly. As I got closer, the shape resolved. A person. Wearing a store uniform. Standing behind an invisible counter. Their face was turned slightly away. Familiar. Painfully familiar. Hey, I said. They didn't move. I stepped closer. Hey, I repeated. Their head tilted. Slowly. Deliberately. They looked at me. And I understood. It wasn't another person. It was what I had been. Or what I was becoming. Their face was smooth, indistinct, as if details had been worn away. Their eyes were empty. But there was recognition there. Not of me. Of itself. Of the role. The position. The thing that stayed. My chest tightened. No, I whispered. The figure raised a hand. Pointed. Behind me. I turned. The aisle stretched back the way I had come. Endless. Silent. Waiting. When I looked back, the figure was gone. In its place, a shelf. Neatly stocked. I stood there for a long time. Then I turned. And started walking. In the morning, the day shift employee unlocked the store and stepped inside. Everything was as it should be. The aisles were aligned. The shelves were stocked. The lights hummed steadily overhead. The register was clean. The logbook sat open on the counter. There was a note written in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. Night shift covered. No name. The employee frowned, trying to remember who had worked overnight. The thought slipped away before it could settle. They shrugged and set their bag down. Business as usual. As they walked down aisle 3, they paused. Something felt off. A gap. Narrow. Easy to miss. They turned their heads slightly, trying to focus on it. For a moment, it seemed like there was another aisle there. One that hadn't been there before. Then the lights flickered. They blinked. And it was gone. But for just a second, they had the distinct, unsettling feeling that something in the store had noticed them looking. And had moved. The store's freezer door opened to reveal a staircase made of receipts. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. The freezer along the back wall had always been temperamental. Its fluorescent tube flickered at irregular intervals, sometimes buzzing like an insect caught between glass panes. When it dimmed, the glass door reflected the aisle behind me in a warped, grayish smear. When it brightened, the interior came into focus again. Wire racks, boxed ice cream, rows of frost-limbed doors inside doors. That night, sometime after 2 a.m., the flicker lingered half a second too long. The reflection in the glass stretched, warped, and then fell away. The door was open. I hadn't touched it. Cold air spilled out in a steady breath, curling across the linoleum and touching the toes of my shoes. I remember the hum of the refrigeration unit deepening, as if it had inhaled. The store around me, empty aisles, rows of stacked goods, the dull glow of overhead lights, seemed to recede, as though the open freezer were drawing focus, pulling the space inward. I stepped closer. There should have been a narrow aisle of frozen food behind the door. Instead, there was a descent, a staircase, steep and narrow, dropping into darkness. Each step was made of tightly layered receipt paper. Not just laid across, but constructed, thousands of printed slips compressed and bound together, edges curling slightly, the pale thermal paper giving off a faint, chemical scent. The printed text, inked black lines, item lists, Timestamps ran across every surface, wrapping the steps in overlapping columns of transactions. I didn't go down. Not then. I stood there long enough for the light to flicker again. When it did, the door was closed. The handle was cold under my hand when I tested it. The interior, when I pulled it open again, was exactly as it should have been. Frozen pizzas, bags of peas, condensation on the glass. I told myself I'd imagined it. I started noticing the receipts before I admitted anything was wrong. The printer sat beside the register, a small, beige machine that chattered to life with each transaction. It was older than most of the equipment in the store, its casing yellowed, its buttons worn smooth. It had a habit of printing an extra blank line at the end of each receipt, as though it were hesitating before letting go. Around 1:30 a.m., it printed a receipt when there was no one at the counter. The sound, sharp, mechanical, cut through the quiet. I turned from where I was restocking cigarettes and watched the paper emerge in a slow curl. I waited for the door chime. For footsteps. For anything. Nothing. The receipt finished printing and hung there, trembling slightly in the draft from the ceiling vent. I tore it off. The timestamp read 1 hour 29 minutes and 47 seconds. The item list was short. Milk 1L. Bread loaf. Candy bar. Total. 612 yen. We hadn't sold anything in the last hour. I checked the register log. The last recorded transaction was at 12:14 a.m., a man who had paid in exact change and left without speaking. The receipt in my hand didn't exist in the system. I told myself it was a glitch. The printer misfiring. Memory corruption. I folded the receipt and slipped it into my pocket without thinking about why. By 2 a.m., there were 3 more. Each printed without a customer. Each listed items we hadn't sold. Each had a timestamp that fit neatly into the gaps between real transactions, as though they belonged to a parallel record. I began keeping them. There was no reason to. But the act of throwing them away felt wrong, like discarding evidence of something I hadn't yet understood. I started a small stack beneath the register. The freezer door opened again the next night. This time, I heard it. A soft click. The suction seal breaking. I looked up from the receipt printer, because by then, I had begun watching it, and saw the door swing inward on its own. The light inside flickered, stuttered, and then steadied. The staircase was there. Unmistakable now. It descended at a slight angle, vanishing into a darkness that didn't behave like the rest of the store's shadows. The steps seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, the printed text dull and matte. I walked toward it before I could talk myself out of it. Up close, the receipts were legible. Each step was a collage of transactions, layered and fused. Some were fresh, crisp paper, sharp ink. Others were faded, the text ghosting into near invisibility. I read the topmost one. Water bottle. Instant noodles. Lighter. Timestamp. 3 hours 12 minutes and 9 seconds. It was a future time. I checked my watch. 2:07 a.m. I reached out and touched the edge of the step. The paper was warm. Not just room temperature. Warm, like skin. I pulled my hand back. Behind me, the store hummed on. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Somewhere in the back, the compressor cycled, a low mechanical thrum. Everything was normal, except for the staircase that shouldn't exist. I stepped onto it. The first few steps felt solid. There was no give beneath my weight, no rustling or shifting. The receipts held together with an unnatural rigidity, as though they had been fused into a single material. The air grew colder as I descended, but it wasn't the clean, sharp cold of a freezer. It was stale, heavy, carrying a faint sweetness that reminded me of old paper and something else I couldn't place. After 10 steps, the store above me disappeared. Not gradually. One moment, I could still see the edge of the freezer door, the strip of fluorescent light spilling down from the aisle. The next, it was gone, cut off by a darkness that pressed in from above, sealing the opening. I stopped. My breath sounded too loud in the confined space. The hum of the store had vanished, replaced by a softer, more diffuse noise, like distant static. I turned, intending to go back up. There was no staircase behind me. Or rather, there was, but it didn't lead anywhere. It rose into darkness, the steps fading into a blackness that seemed to swallow their edges. I told myself I could still climb it. That the path was the same, even if I couldn't see the end. I didn't try. Instead, I kept going down. The space at the bottom wasn't a room. It was an extension of the store. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that it was wrong. The layout mimicked the aisles above, long rows of shelves, narrow pathways, the same industrial flooring, but everything was subtly off. The proportions were slightly skewed. The shelves were too tall, the aisles too narrow, the ceiling too low. The lighting was dimmer, a sickly, uneven glow that seemed to come from nowhere in particular. The shelves were stocked. I walked to the nearest one. The items were familiar, but not in the way store inventory is familiar. These weren't brands I recognized. They were things I recognized. A dented thermos with a chipped lid. A paperback book with a torn cover. A set of keys with a plastic tag. I picked up the keys. They were mine. Or they had been. I knew that in the way you know something without needing to think about it. The weight of them in my hand, the slight bend in one of the teeth, the worn plastic tag with a number I couldn't quite read. I didn't remember losing them. I didn't remember owning them. I put them back. The shelf stretched on, filled with objects that tugged at me in the same way, half familiar, half forgotten. Things that felt like they belonged to me, or had belonged to me, at some point I couldn't place. I moved deeper into the aisle. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the air itself were thickening. At the end of the row, there was another staircase. This one was narrower, steeper, also made of receipts. When I climbed back up, the store was exactly as I had left it. The freezer door was closed. The lights were steady. The hum of the refrigeration units was constant and unremarkable. For a long time, I stood behind the counter, staring at the receipt printer. At 3:12 a.m., it printed. Water bottle, instant noodles, lighter, total, 458 yen. I didn't tear it off immediately. I watched the paper curl, the ink settle into the thermal surface. Then I took it, folded it carefully, and added it to the stack beneath the register. After that, the receipts came faster. They printed in clusters, sometimes 2 or 3 in a row, each with timestamps that crept closer to the present. They began to include details that were harder to ignore. Short lines of text beneath the item lists. Notes. Customer asked about cigarettes behind counter. Clerk hesitated before answering. Conversation lasted 14 seconds. I had no memory of the interaction. At 2:43 a.m., a man came in and asked for cigarettes. I handed them to him without thinking. He said, "You look tired." I said, "It's a long shift." He paid and left. At 2:44 a.m., the printer produced a receipt. Cigarettes pack. Total. 540 yen. Notes. Customer commented on clerk's fatigue. Clerk responded with rehearsed phrase. The phrasing was wrong. Rehearsed. I began writing things down. I kept a notebook beneath the counter, recording each anomalous receipt, each discrepancy between what I remembered and what the printer recorded. At first, the differences were small. A second added to a timestamp. A word changed in a conversation. Then they grew. Receipts appeared for transactions that never happened at all. Receipts appeared for conversations that hadn't occurred. Receipts appeared with my name on them. The first time I saw my name, I almost didn't recognize it. It was printed in the same font as everything else, blocky, utilitarian, but something about seeing it there, in that context, made it feel foreign. Customer. My name. Items. Memory, childhood, undefined. Time segment, 0 hours 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Total. The total field was blank. Beneath it, a note. Transaction pending. I read it over and over again, trying to find a way to interpret it as a mistake, a glitch, anything other than what it appeared to be. I couldn't. That night, the freezer door opened 3 times. Each time, it was a different door. The first was the one at the back of the store. The second was the ice cream freezer near the front. The third was a small chest freezer in the corner that I had never seen open before. Each time, the staircase was there. Each time, it led downward. I started to forget things. Small things at first. where I had put my pen, whether I had restocked a shelf, the name of a regular customer. Then larger things, conversations, entire stretches of time. I would look at the clock and find that an hour had passed without my noticing. The receipts filled in the gaps. They told me what I had done, what I had said, what I had sold. They told me things I didn't remember thinking. Notes. Clerk considered closing store early. Clerk dismissed thought. Clerk experienced brief disorientation. I began to rely on them. That was the worst part. I trusted the printer more than I trusted myself. The descent became routine. Each night, I would find a staircase and go down. I told myself I was documenting it. That I needed to understand what was happening. In truth, I was looking for something. An answer. Or maybe just the shape of the thing that was taking pieces of me. The deeper levels were worse. The aisles became more distorted, the shelves more crowded with objects that felt like fragments of a life I couldn't fully recall. Photographs with faces I couldn't name. Clothing I didn't remember buying. Receipts. Everywhere, receipts. They littered the floors, hung from the shelves, drifted through the air like slow, weightless snow. I picked them up, read them. They were all mine. Transactions for things I had lost, forgotten, never known I'd had. Transactions for time. Transactions for moments. A receipt for a conversation with someone whose face I could no longer picture. A receipt for a decision I didn't remember making. A receipt for a night I couldn't place. Each one chipped away at something inside me. Not painfully. Not even noticeably, at first. Just a gradual thinning. The bottom wasn't where I expected it to be. There was no final staircase that ended in a cavernous chamber, no grand reveal. It was just another level. Another aisle. Another counter. I knew I was at the bottom because the receipts stopped. The air was still. The space was quiet in a way that felt absolute, as though sound itself had been removed. The counter stood at the center of the room. It was identical to the one upstairs. Behind it, the receipt printer sat, silent. And behind the counter, someone was standing. They looked like me. Not exactly. There was something wrong with the details. The posture was too rigid. The expression too neutral. The eyes, empty, in a way that didn't read as emotionless, but as unfinished. They held a receipt in one hand. They were waiting. I approached slowly. Each step felt like it took longer than it should have, as though the space between us were stretching. When I reached the counter, they didn't speak. They held out the receipt. I took it. The paper was warm. Customer. My name. Items. Identity primary. Memory set remaining. Time unallocated. Total. Notes. Final transaction. I looked up. They were watching me. Waiting. For what? I didn't know. But I understood, in a way that didn't require explanation, that this was the point at which something would be completed. Or lost. Or both. My hands were shaking. I set the receipt on the counter. I'm not buying this, I said. My voice sounded thin, distant. The version of me behind the counter didn't react. They simply reached for the register. The drawer slid open with a soft mechanical click. Inside, instead of cash, there were more receipts. Neatly stacked. Organized. I saw my name again and again. On every one. I backed away. The space around me seemed to shift, the edges of the room blurring. The counter elongated, the shelves stretching upward. The figure behind the counter remained fixed, centered, unchanged. Waiting. I turned and ran. The staircase was there. It always was. I climbed it blindly, not counting the steps, not looking back. The darkness pressed in, the air growing thinner, heavier. At some point, I realized I couldn't remember why I was running. I kept going anyway. When I reached the top, the freezer door was open. The store beyond was bright. Normal. I stumbled out, nearly falling. The door swung shut behind me with a soft, final sound. Everything is normal now. The lights don't flicker. The freezer doors stay closed. The aisles are straight, the shelves are orderly, the store is exactly what it should be. I do my job. I ring up customers. I restock shelves. I count the register at the end of my shift. There are gaps in my memory. But there have always been gaps. That's normal, isn't it? The receipt printer works fine. It prints when it's supposed to. Most of the time. Sometimes, late at night, it starts on its own. Just one line at first. Then another. A strip of paper, slowly feeding out. I don't always look at it. But when I do, I see the steps forming. One receipt at a time. Layered. Stacked. Building something that isn't there yet. But will be. Soon.